Hi, this is Jeff. Welcome to the blog I'm doing on some subledger architecture activity. In this blog, I'm going to show kind of what I call a fatal flaw in the way that Oracle designed the subledger architecture process, and then some security flaws in the way they've built seated responsibilities in menus. So this is all going to be driven off of a little document I put together, an article, if you will, on this topic. And what we're looking at today is an R12 environment where Oracle had introduced the subledger architecture, which is really kind of a module in and of itself. In doing so, they are working towards standardizing the way accounting is stored and transferred to the general ledger, and they've allowed for multiple accounting methods for subledger activity. For example, in one ledger you can have cash basis, and another ledger you could have accrual basis. So there's some great benefits to this new change in architecture in R12. Oracle, one other benefit is they introduced the MOAC functionality, which is part of the security model they introduced to allow for shared services and cross-operating unit activity. So there's a lot of new features in R12. This is just, and this is one that I think has a lot of benefits. We're just going to look at some flaws in the design of the process and the security. So we're going to look at a couple things today. The three topics we're going to look at that I'm calling issues that you need to consider when implementing or upgrading to R12. The first one is the ability to create a manual journal entry through the subledgers. Generally speaking, when you're designing controls related to journal entries, often there is the implementation of the journal approval workflow, which is a standard workflow that Oracle provides in the general ledger module. If not, the controls related to the manual controls related to journal entries center around manual journal entries within the entered in the general ledger module itself, and sometimes there's some controls outside the system to review those. Sometimes there's a segregation of duties between enter journals and post journals is one way that people have handled that, i.e. the person that does the post journals reviews, does the approval, and then posts them. So what we have here is a process that kind of circumvents those traditional controls, whereas in the subledger modules like payables and receivables, as examples, you can actually create a manual journal entry, free-form journal entry, just like you're doing it in the general ledger. Even if you're using the journal entry approval process, most organizations exempt out the subledgers from that approval process for a variety of reasons. The primary reasons are, number one, there's controls placed and designed and in place in the subledger modules over coding of invoices, for example, and payables and transactions and receivables. The other thing, frankly, is if the volume of the data coming into the general ledger, if somebody was going to review those journal entries, they're made up of potentially hundreds or thousands of transactions, and the person reviewing those journal entries, for all intents and purposes, would have no way of understanding whether the journal entry was appropriate. So, generally, the subledger journal entries that come into the general ledger go through different controls, or often are relying upon those subledger controls. And so, having the ability, or giving a user the ability to create a manual journal entry with a journal source of payables, for example, when that would be the case where you're entering a journal entry through the payables module, that would be a backdoor manual journal entry process. It would be a significant flaw, I guess, in the way the system is designed, and a significant deviation from what the expected controls are. So we're looking at how that's done today, ability to create a manual journal entry through the subledgers. I'm going to show you this through a standard menu, and you'll see that capability is actually being done through an inquiry menu. So that's a design flaw in the way the menus are designed within the receivables module in this case. And I'm going to show you some inconsistencies in the design of subledger menus and seated responsibilities. Often people come to me as they're designing security, and there's some level of assurance. They think that Oracle has taken certain things into consideration when they're designing menus or seated responsibilities, and they should be able to rely upon some of the work that Oracle did. And what this will show you as an example is there is inconsistencies between modules and how things are being handled. And so the point I would make as we get into this is just that you really should be designing things from the ground up and not relying upon the work at all from Oracle. So we're going to look at the one critical function here, which is SLA, create subledger journal entry. This is the bad boy that allows you to create a journal entry through the subledger architecture, the SLA menus. So I'll just go through first and show a demonstration here of how this is done. This is in a Vision environment, Solution Beacon's 12.1.3 environment. Again, thanks to Solution Beacon for hosting this public domain environment that I get to use and to demonstrate some of these issues. So this happens to be how I navigate to this form is through this inquiry menu. So the navigation path is inquiry, subledger, accounting, journal entries. This is the underlying menu. This is AR Navigate GUI, which is the top level, most powerful menu in the receivables module. If you're not in the Vision environment, you may find that menu under like the receivables manager responsibility. It comes preceded with the application. So you click on that. It's a new OE framework form or a screen, subledger journal entries, and what triggers this, the ability to create, is this create journal entry button here. If you have the function excluded at the responsibility level, this create journal entry button will go away and it will not allow you to create the journal entry. So that's one of the ways to mitigate this risk. So when you press the create journal entry button, you're receiving the screen. You're entering the things that are asterisks here are required fields, so ledger, GL date, category, description. You press continue, which I'm sorry I've got that boxed out here, but continue, you get to the next screen, and this is where you're creating lines in essence for the journal entry. So you enter the accounting key flex field or the chart of accounts values. Make sure the journal entry balances your debits equal credits. You press the continue button again. It takes you to a summary of that journal entry. As long as it looks okay, you press the finish button, and it says you successfully created a subledger journal entry JTH test, which is my name of the journal entry, as final. When whatever module you're in, whether it's payables or receivables or another subledger module that transfers data to the general ledger, when you run the payable transfer to GL process, this will get batched in with the rest of the data. So if you've got hundreds or thousands of invoices coming across in payables, this is going to show us one small portion of that. It would be be very difficult, if not impossible, to detect that this was actually manually entered as opposed to being created through the create accounting process through, for example, the entry of an invoice in payables. So you can see this is a pretty significant flaw. I don't know why they would have done this. To me, from a design perspective, all journal entry activity, manual journal entry activity, should have gone through the general ledger process. There is a fairly simple mitigation of this when you're designing security that I talked about earlier. So it's not like you can't work around this. The next thing I want to show you is just a standard journal sources configuration. I talked about it earlier. It's not that uncommon to exempt out payables and receivables as examples from the journal approval workflow. This required journal approval column here is what drives that. So in this test environment, both payables and receivables are exempt from the journal approval workflow. As I design controls and specifically the journal approval workflow, I traditionally recommend that payables and receivables not go through the journal approval workflow because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So next I'm going to show you some menus, some seated menus and responsibilities that have this flaw in it, if you will. And I thought this was interesting. I ran across this looking at different issues in environment. So the project costing superuser, which is a standard responsibility that's seated with the application, it actually has this function exclusion on it. So somebody in the project's product development area or development area at Oracle must have identified that particular function as something that shouldn't traditionally be with a project costing super user, so an end user. So I did an about this record so you could see this particular row was created by a seated install user Oracle 12.0.0. So this is very early on in Oracle's release of R12, the first release, the 12.0 release. Whereas in other modules, like the payables manager, for example, the function exclusion didn't exist, but yet certainly that function is within that menu. Receivables manager, the same thing, function exclusion didn't exist, and again, it's certainly within that menu. In the last example, is cash management function didn't exist, but it certainly was within that menu. So the point being, there was a risk identified by one product group within Oracle. If I go back to this project costing super user, there was a risk identified relating to this specific function, properly identified, because this is a risk that should be excluded from, I think, in all cases, all users. But that risk wasn't populated, if you will, or shared with other product areas within Oracle. So it kind of shows you that their process of analyzing and mitigating these risks and the way they design standard responsibilities is inconsistent. So hopefully this helps you. Certainly when we design security, we do security design for upgrades and new implementations. We take things like this into consideration. There's some other blogs that I've done that hopefully give you some ideas, and I'm going to do more on some security design blogs in the future. So if you have any questions on this topic or anything else related to security and controls for Oracle eBusiness Suite, please contact me at jhare@erpra.net. That's jhare@erpra.net. Website is erpra.net. You can contact me or the rest of the people in our organization through that contact us form. So hopefully this helps, and have a great day.